When police entered the house on Delmar Street that morning, something immediately felt wrong. 3 women had been inside that house the night before. Their cars were still parked outside. Their purses were still inside. The television had been left on. But the women themselves were gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no forced entry, nothing that suggested violence had taken place. And yet 3 people had completely vanished. More than 30 years later, investigators are still asking the same chilling question. How can 3 adults disappear from a single house without leaving a trace? This is the disturbing mystery of the Springfield Three. On June 7, 1992, Springfield, Missouri was the kind of place where people felt safe. It was a quiet Midwestern town where neighbors waved to each other across their lawns, children played outside until sunset, and serious crime felt like something that happened somewhere else. That night should have been a celebration. 18-year-old Stacy McCall had just graduated from high school. Like many teenagers finishing a major milestone, she wanted to celebrate with her closest friends. One of those friends was Susie Streeter. The two had spent the evening visiting different graduation parties around town, enjoying the excitement of finally finishing school and looking ahead to the future. Late that night, the girls decided to spend the night at Susie's home on Delmar Street. Waiting there was Susie's mother, Sherrill Levitt. Sherrill was 47 years old and worked as a hairdresser. Friends described her as warm, friendly, and deeply devoted to her daughter. The plan was simple. Stacy and Susie would sleep at the house, wake up early the next morning, and meet friends to a trip to a nearby water park. It was supposed to be the start of a fun summer. But sometime during that night, something happened inside that house. Something that would turn an ordinary suburban street into the center of one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in American history. The next morning, 2 friends arrived at the house to pick up Stacy and Susie. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The house looked calm and quiet, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. Eventually, they went inside, and that's when they began to notice small details that didn't make sense. The women's cars were still parked outside the house. Inside, their purses were sitting in plain view. Their makeup, their jewelry, their clothes, all of it was still there. But the women themselves were nowhere to be found. Even stranger, the front door was unlocked and the porch light outside had been shattered. Pieces of glass had been scattered across the porch, but someone had tried to clean up. At first, the friends assumed the women had simply stepped out somewhere, but as the hours passed, concern slowly turned into fear. Because 3 adults don't usually leave their home without taking their cars, their purses, or telling anyone where they're going. Something was terribly wrong. When police arrived at the house, they immediately realized the situation was highly unusual. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no evidence of a violent crime. Inside the home, everything looked almost perfectly normal. Too normal. Detectives began carefully examining every room, but they struggled to find anything that explained how 3 women could vanish from the same place at the same time. There were no fingerprints that didn't belong, no blood, no clear evidence that a violent crime had taken place. It was as if the women had simply walked out of the house and disappeared into thin air. But investigators knew that wasn't likely, because people don't just abandon their cars, their purses, and all of their personal belongings without a reason, which led detectives to a terrifying possibility. Whoever was responsible may have taken all 3 women from the house during the night. As news of the disappearance spread, the quiet town of Springfield was thrown into shock. Volunteers began organizing search parties. Friends, neighbors, and strangers combed through nearby woods, fields, and abandoned buildings, hoping to find some sign of the missing women. Police launched one of the largest investigations the city had ever seen. Helicopters flew overhead. Tracking dogs searched the area. Investigators interviewed hundreds of people who might have seen something. But the search produced almost nothing. No witnesses had seen anything suspicious that night. No one reported hearing screams or signs of a struggle, and no physical evidence pointed towards a suspect. For detectives, it was deeply frustrating, because crimes almost always leave behind some kind of trace, a fingerprint, a witness, a mistake. But in this case, it was as if the person responsible had carefully planned everything. Over time, investigators began exploring different theories. One possibility was that the women had been targeted by someone they knew, someone who could approach the house without raising suspicion, someone who might have convinced them to open the door willingly. Once inside the home, controlling 3 victims would have been difficult, but not impossible, especially if the attacker had a weapon. Still, without evidence, investigators could only speculate. As the months passed, the case grew colder. Thousands of tips were called in. Some people claimed to have seen the women in different states. Others reported suspicious individuals who might have been involved, but none of the leads produced solid answers. Years turned into decades, and the mystery only deepened. For the families of the missing women, the uncertainty became its own form of torment, not knowing whether their loved ones were alive or dead, not knowing who was responsible, and not knowing if justice would ever come. The Springfield Three case also had a lasting psychological impact on the community. Before the disappearance, Springfield felt safe. But after that night, many residents began locking their doors and windows more carefully. Neighbors became more cautious. Parents worried more about their children. Because if 3 people could disappear from a quiet suburban home without a single witness, then anyone could be vulnerable. More than 30 decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. Investigators still accept tips. True crime researchers continue examining the evidence, hoping that some overlooked detail might reveal the truth. But so far, no definitive answers have emerged. The house on Delmar Street has long since returned to quiet suburban life. Yet the questions surrounding what happened inside that home continue to haunt investigators and the public alike. What really happened during those hours in the middle of the night? Was it a carefully planned abduction? A predator who had been watching the house for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment? Or something even darker? Until the truth is finally uncovered, the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall will remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. And somewhere out there, someone may still know exactly what happened that night.